Good evening. Welcome to Metropolitan Community College's 17th Annual Diversity Matters Film Series. Once again, we are excited to bring thought-provoking and enlightening presentations followed by discussion led by experts from academia, business, arts, and community organizations. Your microphones and chat with other audience members are turned off. Please send your messages or questions for the speaker through the chat function to myself, the moderator, Cynthia Gooch Grayson. Also, please watch the chat for a link to an online evaluation. Those who participate in 20 sessions over the academic year and complete the evaluation with contact information will be recognized. This evening, we will watch a documentary and have the pleasure of learning from Dr. Byron DeAndre OREY as our discussion leader. Dr. OREY earned a bachelor's degree in business administration from Mississippi Valley State University, an HBCU, an MPA from the University of Mississippi, a master's of arts in political science from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, and a PH.D. from the University of New Orleans. He currently serves as a W.K. Kellogg Fellow with the Kellogg Foundation. Upon receiving his PhD, he taught at the University of Mississippi, was tenured and promoted to associate professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and currently teaches at the Jackson State University, where he is professor and past chair of the political science department. Professor OREY's research is in the area of race, politics, and social justice, both focusing heavily on the psychology of Black trauma, implicit bias, voting rights, police reform, and systemic racism. He has conducted lectures at Oxford University, Yale University, and Spelman College. I have to add, and Metropolitan Community College. He has also published over 30 peer-reviewed scholarly articles and book chapters, presented manuscripts at over 100 conferences, and received nearly $800,000 in research grants and fellowships to conduct research and mentor students. As the director of the Jackson Political Science Research Laboratory, he has established a pipeline of students of color entering PhD programs. Over the last 10 years, 18 of his former research assistants have enrolled in some of the top PhD programs across the country. His work has been published in the American Politics Research, Twin Research, and Human Genetics State Politics and Policy Quarterly, Social Science Quarterly, Journal of Women, Politics and Policy, Race and Policy, and the Journal of Black Studies. Commentary by Professor OREY has also appeared in several media outlets, to include MSNBC, CNN, The Daily Beast, and the NewsHour. Please welcome Dr. Byron DeAndre OREY, who will introduce Meltdown in Dixie. Dr. OREY.
Thank you, Dr. Gooch Grayson, and it's always a pleasure to be here. I wish I could be here in person, but virtual is the way that we're going these days. So I had an opportunity to preview the movie, and it is really consistent with some of the experiences that I've had growing up in Mississippi. I'll talk a lot more about this when we have the post-discussion, but I was born in Mississippi. I was socialized in Mississippi as it relates to the flag. The flag, until recently, was our state flag, and I've seen both perspectives as it relates to the flag. Some believe that the flag represents hate. There are a number of hate groups, the Ku Klux Klan. Some even consider the Sons of the Confederacy as a nationalist group. And so I've seen the hate argument. I've also seen the heritage argument, where the Daughters of the Confederacy have suggested that this is the heritage. I mean, this is their forefathers and mothers who actually, fought on the side of the Confederacy. And so I've seen both arguments presented in different spaces. But tonight, I think there are a number of things, or just a few things I'd ask that you look out for. First of all, what is this relationship as it relates to racism. I mean, the flag is often associated with racism, but when you look at the movie, try and tease out where that is born out, or that materializes in the movie. Also, I want you to focus on the South Carolina Declaration of Secession. It will only be mentioned once, but listen when the presenter introduces this concept of the Declaration of Succession, where he talks about the origin of the issue of slavery as it relates to the Civil War. And then, was the race a factor in determining the outcome of the flag issue in South Carolina? These are just a few issues that I wanted to bring to your attention, and we'll discuss them in more details at the end of the movie. Thank you, and enjoy the movie.
Okay, everyone, thank you for sending me your questions that I will now pose to Dr. OREY. Dr. OREY, you have a number of questions. Ready?
Yeah, let me just give a little background first before I go into the questions, because this movie or documentary is so parallel with my life experiences. A little bit about me. Mississippi was a little slow in terms of integration. Brown versus Board was 1954. We integrated right around 1968, 69. And I don't mind dating myself. I was first grade in 1972. So in 1972, 73, 74, we actually would take field trips over to the Vicksburg Battlefield Civil War Museum. And we had one story that we received when we went to the museum, and that was that the Confederates were heroes. And so it was so much so that I remember coming home with one of those little Confederate hats because I thought it was a cool hat. And so I was wearing a Confederate hat, you know, as a youth. And then I remember my classmates having these little watches that played Dixie. And at this time, these are watches, you know, digital watches in 1973, 74. That was a big thing. So I asked my father, could I get one of those watches? And of course, he didn't let me get a Dixie watch. I ended up getting a watch, but it wasn't a Dixie watch. But we didn't discuss the other story. And so years went by, even going through high school, going through college, I never heard the other story in terms of race and slavery associated with the Declaration of Secession and whatnot. And so when I went to the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss, I didn't realize until later when I actually taught at the University of Mississippi that Ole Miss was the older mistress on the plantation. She was married to the old master. And I didn't learn that until I'd actually taught at the university. The Rebels were the Rebels was the football team, the Ole Miss Rebels. Well, the Rebels were the Civil War rebels. And so we didn't learn any of this while I was in undergrad. I didn't even learn it in graduate school when I attended graduate school there. So there are a lot of parallels here. You know, I learned about the Dixiecrats in 1948 using the Confederate flag when they ran on the platform of segregationists. And that actually was my socialization to me conducting research in the area that I began conducting research on. When I got back to the University of Mississippi as a professor in 1999, there was a lot of talk beginning about trying to take the flag down. And so in 1999, we began to mobilize to try and take the flag down. Well, the flag went up for a vote, a state vote, to a referendum, and it actually failed miserably. It fell by a count of 65% to keep the old flag and 35% to get a new flag. And so for me, that was enough. I decided that I would leave Mississippi and I moved to all places, the great state of Nebraska. So I actually left the state because of my, you know, deep-rooted feelings that I had actually developed associated with the flag based on the knowledge that I had accrued over these years of schooling. So then when I came back to Mississippi, and this is why we have these, sort of direct parallels to the movie, the ice cream owner picked his bags up, left, moved back to Maryland. Well, I decided, look, I'm going back to Mississippi. That's where I'm from. So I decided to move back to Mississippi, and I developed another line of research. And this research I thought would help actually get rid of the flag. It was my intention to serve as an expert witness. So what I did was I wanted to show that the flag was traumatizing to Black people. Well, how would you do that? Well, when I was at the University of Nebraska, we were doing some research in the area of biopolitics. And what we did was we connected people to electrodes, and we saw how they physiologically responded when they saw certain images. And so I connected people to electrodes, and then we'd see how much they sweat. And the more you sweat means the more you're stressed. And so when I showed them images of the Confederate flag, we actually found that Black people who saw the flag were sweating more and more profusely. And so this was our first, sort of dig into trying to show that the flag actually harmed Black people. But fortunately for me, we didn't have to take this to court. We, unlike they did in Orangeburg, we were able to put it on the ballot again. And I never thought in a million years that we would get rid of the state flag, which was the Confederate battle symbol in the left canton corner. And to my surprise, here in Mississippi, we passed by a margin of 73% to 27% to get rid of the old Confederate flag. And now we have a new flag. And so this is sort of, I guess, the background that I bring, or this is my background, and it is such a strong parallel. I mean, even with Orangeburg, with respect to the young men being killed at the university, the same thing happened in Jackson, Mississippi. In 1971, two Black kids were actually killed at Jackson State University. I mean, there's so many parallels here, but I won't take the floor too long. I'll yield it back over to you, Doc, and let me know what kind of questions we're working with tonight.
Okay, that was very interesting. Thank you for sharing. How do you think those who proudly post the Confederate flag define racism? They say that the Confederate symbol is not racist, but historical or part of their heritage.
Yeah, so they don't see it as being harmful because it's not harmful to them. And so for them, it is their heritage. And this is something, as a political scientist, as, someone who teaches critical thinking, I had to really come to grasp and actually, ask this question of myself and answer the question. And that is, if my great-great-great-great-grandparent, which is blood relative, fought in a war, then I'm going to support my great-great-great-great-grandparent. Now, should I support him, knowing that the flag was associated with slavery? The normative question is what ought to be or what should be. The answer should be no. But the reality is that it's their bloodline. And so they can't see its cognitive dissonance. They can't see beyond the fact that this is a direct lineage. Now, the other issue is, though, that some people bring up is that many of these folks probably don't have relatives who fought in the war and don't know whether or not they had relatives who fought in the war. And so that suggests that it's something a little bit more, that the dynamics are a little different, and that's race-based, that you're aligning yourself with a group. And that gets into this notion that this is a bigger issue. And this issue, in some respects, is about the browning and darkening of America. And so here in Mississippi, we're 40% Black. And so V.O. Key wrote in the book, Southern Politics in the State and Nation, in those areas where there are high percentages of Blacks, 30, 40, 50, 60%, this is where you're going to find the most support for demagogues. This was written in 1949.
Wow.
Now you see support for demagogues as we become getting, darkening of America. you see, I mean, the support of demagogues, people using language that they typically would not have used as relates to racial undertones, and now overt and blatant racist language. I hope I
Okay.
touched on some of that.
Yes, absolutely. Do you believe that through voting we can impact the community divisions that are represented in this documentary?
Yeah, so I think, if we take Mississippi, for example, Mississippi is 40% Black, and even though the flag passed at 73% in support of changing the flag, if those Blacks would not have turned out to vote, then it would not have passed. And so there is power definitely in the vote. And the divisions are going to remain. Again, once you get populations that increase to where one group is beginning to be a minority, then there's a threat of losing power. And we saw it in Orangeburg. Orangeburg actually was 60% Black, and this was losing power. I mean, they had already elected a Black mayor. The city council was a majority Black. And I had a question down that I'd written down for myself as to whether or not race had an impact on keeping the flag, and the answer was no. The answer was no, because the city council was majority Black. The motion was actually rendered by a Black person to actually maintain the flag. So there are a lot of dynamics in that, a lot of moving parts here.
Thank you. Fear. I couldn't believe it when she raised her hand, though. But if I had some socks or tomatoes, I would have thrown them at my screen. But anyway, are those who revere the Confederacy a dying generation? Do you see youth as more accepting of diversity or not?
No, I definitely see youth accepting diversity, and that's why you see this whole nonsense about anti-critical race theory. It's really anti-Blackness, and it's an attack, an assault on anti-racist material that's being taught. And so the more you learn, the more you become more tolerant. Now, that's the difference between tolerant and, inclusivism and, and embracing another group. But as education increases, whether it's formal or learned substantive information, the more you become more tolerant, and then you can actually move beyond that tolerance to inclusivism. So if you don't know, then you maintain the status quo. And so this is why conservatism in the South, for example, racial conservatism, has always been encouraged. It's been encouraged because, again, this is where you have the largest percentage of Blacks in the South. As there are higher percentages of Blacks and other ethnic groups, this is where you see the greatest threat and the greatest fear. And so the fear and the threat is that the hegemony of one group is going to be lost. Their power is going to be lost. And so when you began to teach facts about how for example, Reconstruction ended, it was basically vigilantes, and that it wasn't that Blacks were incompetent, but Blacks were not given the resources that their predecessors had had. When you began just teaching more and more facts, then you can't help but be more inclusive, or to be more inclusive of different attitudes and beliefs.
Okay, thank you. What are your thoughts on how to combat the fear and rumors that hate groups impose on a community?
Education, 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 education. We're currently working on republishing a book. It's Mississippi Conflict and Change in Mississippi. And the book was really the first critical race theory type of book. So it was really one of the first anti-Black or anti-racist book that was printed in 1974. my colleague who passed away wrote one book that sold over 1.5 million copies, Jim Lowen, lies my teacher told me.
Yeah.
He was the author of the book, and this book just provided the facts, and it provided, images of lynchings, and people in Mississippi in 1974. This is only a few years, removed from the civil rights era. So they didn't want this information to be published, and so it was understandably. I understand why Mississippi at that time and period would have rejected Mississippi Conflict and Change. I mean, you're talking about a book that had a lynching in it, and lynchings that just really stopped only about 10 years prior to that book being published. But thankfully, the federal courts ruled in his favor, and he was able to actually get the book adopted. And so Mississippi, some school districts in Mississippi were able to adopt it. But my point is that education is the key and the strongest variable in terms of, changing attitudes and behavior.
Speaking of education, what is currently being taught about the Confederacy in Mississippi K through 12 schools?
It's not, sadly enough, it's not being taught. In fact, if it is to be taught going forward, it has to be taught very carefully. Now we've actually been one of those states to adopt these critical race theory laws where you can't teach certain beliefs, but the law is so vaguely written that it makes no sense. But that's one of the problems, and one of the fears, that anything that one might change can have an impact, or anything that one might teach can be perceived to fall under the guise of this law. And so other than teaching it the facts and, and not associating it, for example, with the research that I've done to show that whites who subscribe to old-fashioned racist beliefs are more likely to support the Confederate flag, even though that's an empirical study, it can be perceived as, I don't know. I can't even answer the question that I'm posing to myself, because that is exactly the conundrum that we're in. They produced a law that is so vague that we don't know how to actually move forward with it.
Interesting. That said, do you think that churches and civic organizations need to get back to the ways of the civil rights movement and teaching the actual history?
Yes.
Black history?
Yes, most definitely. And so freedom schools,
yes,
is something that we're looking at here. We have a new museum, and I would strongly encourage you, if you're anywhere near Mississippi, and even if you're not near Mississippi, you need to come visit me. Come down and visit our museum. We have two museums. One is a Mississippi History Museum, and one is a Civil Rights Museum. So they made a compromise that in order to get the Civil Rights Museum, we would have a Mississippi History Museum, and in order to get the Mississippi History Museum, we get a Civil Rights Museum. Either way, we have one of the state-of-the-art museums now in the Mississippi History Museum. And I strongly encourage you all to come visit.
Okay, thank you. In your opinion, is the situation depicted in this documentary common in most Southern states?
Yes, I think so, because as I indicated before, as you see the changing of the guard, if you will, transitioning, moving from a majority white to a majority Black population, and in some instances, like in Texas, a majority brown population, you see this threat and you see this fear. And so they're holding on. And in fact, that's what the guy, what's his name, Buzz, that's what Buzz actually implied at the end. He basically was saying that we're losing power, not only here in Orangeburg, but we're losing power across the country.
Mhm.
And the symbols are falling, monuments are falling, and they feel like they're losing their dominance. And so this is happening all across the South, particularly with respect to monuments and symbols.
In your experience, are those who wanted the Confederate symbols to remain adjusting to Mississippi with the new flag?
Yeah, so that's interesting because even with the owner of the barbecue joint and that used to be where the ice cream parlor was now, or used to be, it's because of economics. Some of it is not because of change in attitudes. It's actually because of necessities like the economy. When places like Walmart and other economic industries said that they would not move to Mississippi, or that they would move, when they began to speak out, when the preachers began to, white preachers began to suggest that, it was time, there are these other variables that are not solely based on race. And so it's kind of difficult to know whether or not things have actually changed. Because when you look at the fact that the state, will not expand Medicaid, it goes out of its way to, make policies that are draconian policies directed toward Black people. The water crisis here in Jackson, Mississippi, the state has, not lent us a helping hand until the federal government stepped in. And so, yeah, it's a lot there.
That concludes the questions that the folks joining in had for you, Dr. OREY. Do you have any final comments before I conclude?
No, I just want to express my appreciation for you all giving me the opportunity to speak on, to this documentary. It's parallel to my life experience. It was such a traumatic experience for me that I picked up and left Mississippi. And when I started doing research, and it was borne out in the research through the empirical findings that people who saw these images actually were more stressed. That's not something that people who do not experience this can understand. And so in some respect, I can see how people who, harp on the heritage and not hate argument continue to maintain that, position, because they don't know the hurt and the pain. I mean, it used to be that I couldn't talk about this, without cracking up, because, it was painful when you look at images of Emmett Till, and then you see images of Confederate flags. And so, I'm a lot better now because we've actually made that change. And I want to thank you all for giving me an opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you for agreeing to visit us virtually. Real quick question. Have you shown this? Had you seen this before?
No, I hadn't.
Okay.
And I really want to know what happens or what is happening now, because you got a majority Black city council.
Right.
The attorney said, fight the fight when it ain't the popular thing to do. And they just need to take it down.
Mm-hmm.
You got the majority vote. You got a Black mayor. I mean, take it down, or at least put it in the hands of the people and let them have a referendum or initiative.
Right. Well, clearly, there's lots more work that needs to be done. Hopefully everyone has registered and will be voting November 8th. And I want to once again thank you, Dr. OREY, for sharing your wisdom with Metropolitan Community College's audiences. Once again, your personal and professional expertise on such important topics such as the Confederate flag and its impact on United States communities helps our audience members, regardless of our individual or collective experiences, it helps us to expand upon what was seen in the documentary Meltdown in Dixie. Audience members, thank you for prioritizing your time to be with us this evening. As the midterm election nears, we once again encourage you to take advantage of your right to vote. Vote early, vote by mail, or vote in person and take someone with you. But please don't ever believe that your vote does not matter, because it does. As a reminder, we will appreciate your feedback on the online evaluation address posted in the chat. We offer over 50 virtual programs in an academic year. If you participate in at least 20, as we mentioned before, and you complete evaluations and provide your contact information, you will be recognized for your dedicated efforts to enhance your knowledge for your academic pursuits or enrich your path of lifelong learning. Join us tomorrow, October 26th at 2:15 p.m. Central Time to watch another documentary, First Vote, with director Yi Chen as our discussion leader. First Vote crafts an insightful look at Asian Americans' diverse experiences at the polls. Have a pleasant evening and good night.